Welcome friends to the session of international business. So, in the last lecture we discussed about what international business is and I gave you a task. I hope you must have done your task. You must have identified the logos which I had given you. So, let us continue with the same, right. So, in the second lecture today we will be continuing with the introduction, right. So, we said what is international business and why international business was has started growing, right. Today we will be discussing some of the importance of international business. So, the first importance that we have mentioned here is earn foreign exchange. So, through the exports of goods and services all over the world, it helps to earn valuable foreign exchange. Today if you do not have enough foreign exchange, then even importing or exporting doing any business becomes a very challenging task, you cannot do it. So, the major role of international business is to earn foreign exchange, right. So, that the countries today hold foreign exchange and they can use it for some other benefit, right. Second is international business, the importance is that it helps to get governmental support and benefits. For example, I have taken, if you can see, the Hyundai unit at Sri Perumbudur, which was done in Tamil Nadu, it helped the company to get several tax relaxations, tax brackets, tax benefits, so that they would set up the plant. So, the government wanted to attract them and start their Hyundai plant and they offered them special benefits. So, this is some of the benefits that companies get when they come into a new country through such kind of for example, provision of easy land rebates, right, etc. The third importance is the optimum utilization of resources. Now, for example, when you are producing, when a company is producing in a domestic market, for example, let us take the very popular case of Reliance. So, when Vimal started and Reliance started its business in textiles, the domestic market was already in coming to a saturation, but the new plant which Reliance set up, it was good enough to produce in a large capacity. So, this large capacity helped to reduce the cost of production, but since the market was already becoming more or less saturated, so they looked an option to go international, and this rather helped the company to not only utilize its resources proper, but because of this they could achieve scales of economy and get into new markets and do better, right. So, they started earning better in foreign exchange, right. Another example why it is so important, international business is so important, is the case of I have given to increase market share. So, I have given the example of Kellogg's in India. When Kellogg's came to India, already it was a known brand, but then they were getting not getting enough sales in the other markets. So, after realizing this, they thought India would be one of the potential markets because the population size of India is extremely huge, right. So, if this market can be tapped, and one more thing is the product that Kellogg's makes, right, cornflakes, it is largely unavailable in India, right, at that time when Kellogg's came. So, Kellogg's was the first to enter into the market and thought they could increase their foothold in India and thus increase their market share, right. Increase the competitive capacity. Now, what does it mean? International business produces high quality goods at low cost by using superior technology, new management techniques, marketing techniques, and spends a lot of money on advertising all over the world. So, it can fight competition from foreign companies. Okay. So, international business is not only spreading your products to other parts, but also spreading high quality, producing high quality goods because of your efficient techniques, efficient mechanisms, and providing it to the consumers across the world, right. So, the consumers also do gain because of the expansion of business around the world. You see, for example, digital payment, use of AI like techniques, Six Sigma like techniques, processes, digital marketing, etc., has made things much simpler, right. This is only a few which I have mentioned. So, there are umpteen number of techniques which the management gurus have taught, and we are today using, the the companies are using for their efficient utilization of resources and manpower, right, to spread business risk, right. Another importance of international business, how international business helps the business firms also. The business firms are able to spread their risk. A loss in one country can be balanced by a profit in another country, right. So, what example I have given is the Nestle case, which Nestle, one of the products, the ice creams, failed in China and some of the units were closed, right. Nestle took a long time to penetrate into the Chinese market, right. Similarly, IBM took a long time to penetrate into the Indian market. Coca-Cola took a long time to penetrate into the Indian market. Coca-Cola was plenty, heavily successful in other countries, but when it came to India, it was comparatively less successful as compared to the other countries, right. You see, for example, this is a case which I have given. Nestle suffered through a problem. Nestle was boycotted in many countries because they promoted their milk powder against the mother's milk. So, this case was in relation to that, where Nestle once had promoted and said that Nestle milk or the product is better than even mother's milk. It was heavily criticized and this criticism led to a dump in the sales. For example, one more case I remember is Maggie's sales in India fell drastically, but had Maggie not been an international company and not been working in Nestle not been working in other countries, then maybe it would have been very difficult to manage themselves, because for few years the dent was so large that Maggie's sales suffered miserably, right. So, these things have happened in almost all companies. Cadbury's once suffered because of some problem, right. They were found some kind of content which was not desirable. So, all these problems are always more or less happening. So, if there is a loss in one, there has to be a balance out in some other country, right. Now, what are the nature of international business? So, first is here we say what is the nature, means what it involves. For example, the involvement of commercial activity, economic or monetary activities like trade, transportation, insurance, warehousing, banking and finance, advertising and publicity, it involves all of these activities, right. So, international business is involved with such kind of commercial activities. So, one has to understand, if they do not understand it well, then it can have a adverse effect on them. They are surrounded with political risk, trade barriers. Today there is a problem with two countries, so let us say US and Iran, and there is a sanction, there might be some trade barriers, right. So, taxes, some kind of taxes imposed. For example, India imposed heavy taxes on the vehicles that were coming from Japan and China. So, in order to save the domestic players, they did it. Political instability, like for example, double taxation avoidance agreement between India and China, and there was a national emergency in India during the 70 and 80, right. So, and political risk is there everywhere. Today you talk about Libya, you talk about the oil countries and the tension between US and Iran. So, there is a political risk all the time, India and Pakistan, right, India and China. So, US and China, the trade war, at the moment when I am standing, the trade war between US and China has escalated to such a level that you can see it, the result is visible through the stock markets across the world. So, the stock markets are crumbling down, right. Then international business differs largely from domestic business, right, since it is engaged in economic transaction with several countries. For example, for that there are free trade agreements, for example, like NAFTA, SAARC and ASEAN, you must have heard about this. So, international business has to be more dynamic, has to handle complexity in a larger way, so that because it is a integral part of it, right. Large scale operations, as I said, the cost per unit of output decreases with large scale of production. In the last session also we have discussed about it, right. Then the sensitive nature of international business, any changes in the economic policy, the technology, the political environment, for example, the pest analysis which we say, right, has a huge impact. So, the government changes its policy, the people's that there is a change in culture, there is a behavioral change, there is a local culture which is affecting. So, all these things makes it very sensitive. For example, when MACD came to India and they provided initially beef, cow is like treated like a mother in India, we all know. So, there was a huge uproar, right, and MACD had to apologize for that, right. So, there are several things. In some countries there are some things, some food habits which are prohibited, in some other countries they are acceptable. For example, beef is acceptable around the world, but in India it is, even in Asian countries, but in India it is a no, right. So, several things are there, right, in terms of our behavior and tradition, right. From here we move into the scope scope of international business. So, what does international provide us, right? First, international business helps us in international marketing, right. So, it says the international marketing, how is it different also, let us see that. The international marketing is the application of marketing principles to satisfy the varied needs and wants of different people residing across the national borders. You see, I have given an example of KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, offers veg and non-veg meals in India, but you hardly hear Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC providing non-veg meals. So, in the last example also I had said how McD's suffered in India, and one interesting example is I will talk about it, is the Kellogg's case. The Kellogg, when it came to India, they suffered through a very typical problem. The typical problem was the habit of the people. Kellogg's, when they offered the cornflakes to Indians, the Indians had a habit of using the cornflakes in drinking hot milk, but cornflakes is advised to be taken in a cold milk. So, this small difference in the habit of people resulted in a fall of Kellogg's in India, and Kellogg's had to take back its products and first educate the customers and educate them and let them tell them this product is suitable to be taken, it should be taken in a cold milk, with cold milk. So, international marketing, which is one of the scope of international business, it tells us that it helps to identify these needs and wants of the customer. Siemens, similarly, when they came to India, they wanted to expand in India, they found a very typical problem, that the electrical regulations, the guidelines were not matching these products which they were making in their home country. When they directly brought it to India, they found it was not working, because the Indian climate was different, the Indian electrical conditions were different. So, they had to redesign their products, right. Second is international finance and investment, another scope of international business. So, international finance is a section of financial economics that deals with the monetary interactions that occur between two or more countries. So, IMF and IBRD are two organizations involved, right. So, it talks about what monetary interactions happen, how it should happen, and what are the policies and guidelines to be taken care of, all these things. The third scope is the earning of the foreign exchange. So, foreign exchange, as I have already explained it, is the trading of one currency for another, right. So, for example, one can swap the US dollar for the euro, right. Now, business, there is the bullion market, for example, going on, the currency market. So, now there is every time, every moment there is exchange of currency, and the buyers and sellers are constantly buying and selling these currencies, right, for their benefits across. So, this is one of the scopes of international business. Another important scope is the global HR, human resource. So, it is an umbrella term that includes all aspect of an organization's HR, payroll and talent management process operating on a global scale. There have been cases where companies have failed just because of a poor HR policy, or even not a poor HR policy, just because they did not understand the human resource requirements, right. So, this case I am talking about is a case of Daimler and Chrysler, right. Daimler being the German counterpart and Chrysler being the US counterpart. So, these two companies merged to form a large entity, but in some time they failed. The major reason for their failure was not technology, was neither any other reason, finance or anything, but it was only because the cultural differences of these two countries, the people of these two countries persisted, and it became so high that the Germans were not able to work with the Americans, and the Americans were not able to work with the German employees, right. So, this case shows us that during international business, it is very, very important to deal with the global HR conditions and the policies, right. For example, I have said salaries and compensation packages, training and development, employee and labor relations, all these are so sensitive because it is connected with the human, it is so sensitive, and what you might think is you may take it casually in one country may become a serious factor for another country, and that impact largely the company's success, right. Okay. So, after the scope, now we move into the modes of entry. When you are doing international business, how do you enter into different countries, right. So, for example, I am an Indian company, for example Tata, and now Tata wants to get into Britain or Tata has gone into Germany, right. So, how do Tatas get into? Is it very simple that you just go into another country and you set up your business? Obviously not. We all know, as a student you also know, and as a faculty I also know, it is not that simple, right. So, how do you what are the modes of entry into international business? We need to understand that. This is a brief diagram which talks about there are three ways majorly: trade related. So, we divide it into trade related, contractual and investment entry, right. So, we will see all of these, but let us take one by one, right. So, the modes of entry is through, this is a simple diagram. So, what it says, extent of investment and risk in the y axis and the degree of ownership and control in the x axis. So, when it is low and high, this is low and high. So, what are the different measures of modes of entry? For example, exporting, licensing, franchising, strategic alliance, joint venture and a wholly owned subsidiary. What you can do is, I will request you to take a break and look at this diagram closely and try to understand why am I saying that the degree of ownership is low in one case and the extent of investment and risk is also low, right, in for example exporting. Why it is very high, why the degree of ownership is very high in the wholly owned subsidiary, and why the extent of investment and risk is also very high. Kindly look into it and try to understand how they are different, right. So, let us start with the first part, the export, right. So, from here if you can look at this, the trade related we are talking about. So, exporting. So, what is direct export? Direct export means the organization produces their product in their home market and sells them to customers overseas, right. So, this is simply I am producing in my home market in India maybe and selling it to in Bangladesh, selling it to Philippines, Mexico, anywhere, right. So, example I have given is Tata Steel exports a large number of steel products to the countries like USA, European Union, Jordan, Qatar, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan and Korea. So, producer selling directly to the importer, right. Direct export has several advantages. What are the advantages? First, a good control over the foreign markets. It gives you straight information from the target market. So, because you are directly doing it, so you get a ground information from the ground level about what the people are thinking, what they want, what they do not want, everything, right. Better protection of trademarks, patents, goodwill and other intangible property, right. So, these are some of the advantages of when you are directly exporting. Potentially greater sales, you can sell more if you would have done it indirectly, right. But every time it does not only have advantages, it has some disadvantages also. So, what are the disadvantages? The startup cost is, the initial setup and the startup cost is very high, right, because you want to directly export, you have to set up the entire channel, right, maybe. Greater information requirements, you cannot just barge into any country, any nation, right. So, you need to understand the complete the pestle analysis, you have to do the pestle analysis, you have to do the SWOT analysis, you have to understand what is the political climate, what is the economic climate, what is the technological climate, social climate, everything, right. And then only you can get into, and these things demand a lot of investment, a lot of you have to be very accurate. If you are not accurate, then it is again trouble. So, you spend a lot of money and then maybe if you are not accurate, then it is dangerous, right. It is highly time consuming, right. So, these are some of the direct export advantages and disadvantages. What is indirect export? Now, I am not doing it directly, right. So, the organizations sell their products to a third party who then sells it on their behalf, right. So, that means I sell it to A and A sells it to some other country for me, right. Example, a EMC is a private company that serves as the export department for several manufacturers. So, there is an EMC which is a private company that serves as the export department for several manufacturers, maybe of the same product, right, similar product, soliciting and transacting export business on behalf of its clients. So, you see there is a producer who is selling it, giving to the exporter or subsidiary of the importer, right. So, there is an importer, there are two importers here. So, one I am giving it to the exporter and this exporter is giving to the importer, right, or there is a subsidiary of the importer in my country maybe, right, and this importer purchases it from me and sells it to this parent company, right, in the parent home in the country, right. So, again this also has its advantages and disadvantages. Now, let us look at the advantages and disadvantages. The first advantage is that fast market access, because I do not need to consume time, I do not need to waste time in learning the habits and everything. So, this exporter or the subsidiary of the importer is a expert in that. So, he knows everything. So, there is a fast market access. So, you are very flexible and you take less time. Okay. Second point is the concentration of resources for production. So, because I am not doing anything, I am just giving it to somebody and he is doing it for me. So, the resources for production I can concentrate on that and use it wisely. Very little financial commitment, right, and I do not need to handle the processes. See, there are two types of major barriers in trade, tariff and non-tariff barriers. So, when we talk about tariff and non-tariff barriers, so one of the non-tariff barriers sometimes are more difficult because they include some of the things like the documentation and policies and all. So, since and they are very cumbersome, very critical, very difficult. The policies for one country is very different for the policies in another country. So, since I do not need to handle this and somebody is doing it and he is taking a some kind of a fee or remuneration from me. So, this is an advantage on my part, that I do not have to put my head into invest my time and energy into it. But the disadvantages are, it has higher risk sometimes. In the risk sometimes, because why I am saying it, the agency who is taking your product, if he is not seriously is not committed to your product, then you do not know what is happening in behind, right. So, that is the risk you hold, right. Little or no control, you do not have any control of the distribution. So, when you do not have the control of the distribution, sales and marketing, how would you get the raw information from the ground level information? And if you do not understand the information, how would you make a change in your product design, if suppose you want to, you have to make it. So, all these things are very important and you sometimes you miss out on them. And inability to operate overseas, you are not able to do it overseas directly. So, as I said earlier, you might not get some of the benefits that earlier you could have got had you done it direct export, right. So, these are some of the advantages and disadvantages. Another feature that comes into play when I am talking about trade is the counter trade. Now, what is counter trade? Exchanging goods or services, right, which are paid for in whole or part with other goods or services. Sometimes, in fact, it happened with Russia. In shortage of money, what happened was they wanted to exchange goods like a barter, right. So, barter is one way of it. So, exchanging goods which are paid with other goods or services, right. So, some of the counter trade mechanisms or ways are, which I will be explaining in my next to next class, just understand. So, barter, switch trading, counter purchase, buyback, offset and compensation trade. So, there are 6 different types of counter trade, and what they are I will explain one by one. So, but just understand today that counter trade means where you are exchanging against goods and services, right. Okay. Piggybacking. Now, what is piggybacking? Is an old and early form of strategic partnering. Two different firms tie up or have a strategic partnership because to get advantage. Now, what it says? It is discussed as a strategy to serve foreign markets, especially where the market has high entry barriers. So, I cannot do everything. So, what I am doing is, the main requirements for piggybacking are producing quality goods and finding firms to carry them for you. So, I am producing a good and somebody is, I am not depending on some exporter, but some other company, he has some know-how. So, I am depending on him to carry my products. So, it is a viable alternative for firms with limited exporting activities, right, and limited resources and lack of foreign market knowledge. A car company tying up with a tire company, or a car company tying up with some other producer who is in a similar field, right. So, and it helps you to take your product and sell it in some other overseas market. So, this is called piggyback. Piggyback means to jump over somebody's back and ride through some way, right. Now, another mode is licensing. Now, what is licensing? It is an agreement between the licensor and the licensee over a period of time for the use of brand name, marketing, know-how, copyright, work method and trademark by paying a license fee. So, you can enter into this also is a very important mode of entry. So, you are entering into another nation or another country. So, this international business organizers or organizations, they do it largely, that they take a license and they produce a product, right. For example, BAT has given licenses in many countries including India, where ITC is the licensed producer of the cigarettes, right. For particular brand I am saying here 555, right. So, license means you give me a license, and once I get the license I can produce it for you, right. So, this licensing is also a very important way which companies have adopted to enter into the new markets. Okay. So, what is the advantage of licensing? It helps you obtain extra income for technical know-how. Suppose you provide license, so you obtain extra income, right. So, you have given the license to somebody, and on basis of that you have earned some income. Reach the markets where earlier you were not able to access, right. Quickly expand without much risk and large capital investment. So, if BAT would have directly wanted to enter India, it would have been maybe tough, but now through ITC they are into India, right. Pave the way for future investments in the market. So, it helps to understand the which sectors would be more attractive, and maybe related areas. So, the company can understand through these partners, right, licensing partners, and maybe in the future they can enter into these new areas. But there are also disadvantages. First, it increases opportunities for intellectual properties and products theft. So, there is a fear that you give a license to somebody, and tomorrow that company may take your entire technology, it may steal your technology, your know-how, and may do it on its own, right. So, this is a fear of intellectual property, mishandling of the intellectual property, right. And inconsistent product quality may affect the brand image, product image negatively. So, I have given a license to somebody to produce, but the company which is producing for me, maybe they do not maintain the right quality levels. So, it is my job to check, obviously, but then every time I cannot check, I have to have some trust on my business partners also. So, in such a condition, if they do not produce and some of the products are bad or inferior and they have reached the market, then it has a huge negative impact on my image, right. And firms can lose control of the competitive advantage, which is connected with the first point itself, right, in disadvantages. Now, another mode of entry is franchising. You must have when I deliberately have given this McDonald's, because this word franchising is connected, several companies adopt franchising techniques, but McDonald's is very popular in India and we know about it. So, arrangement where one party, what it says? It is an arrangement where one party, the franchisor, grants another party, the franchisee, the right to use its trademark or trade name as well as certain business systems and processes to produce and market a good or service according to certain specifications. So, the specifications are decided by the franchisor, right. McDonald's is a popular example of a franchising option for expanding in international markets. So, what is the advantage again? So, there is a low political risk. Well selected partners bring financial investment. They also do bring financial investment as well as new managerial capabilities to the operation. But again the similar disadvantage is like licensing, because it is also a type of licensing. Franchises may turn into future competitors, and wrong franchisee may ruin the company's name and reputation in the market, right. So, these are some of the problems which we are facing. So, the one more is another mode of entry is contract manufacturing. So, nowadays many large companies for Nike, Adidas, Puma, Reebok, they all are getting into, especially the shoes companies I am saying, they are getting into contract manufacturing. So, they are finding offshore markets where production manufacturing is very cheap, right, cheap and inexpensive. For example, it is a strategy for identifying a manufacturing unit to produce items at a competitive price in any part of the world. Nike, you will not believe, Nike procures 100% of its products from different nations. For example, they are made in India, they are made, the Nike shoes are made in the Philippines and other places, right. So, Nike is procuring its athletic footwear in a number of factories in Southeast Asia, India being one of them. Mega Toys is sourcing from China, right. So, this is a contract manufacturing. So, contract manufacturing with a dimension in the service sector offer ample opportunities for Indian companies in the form of BPO and KPO. All the developed nations are becoming end user of outsourced products and services of the developing nations. So, what contract manufacturing helps, or what it does basically, it helps to identify the inexpensive places with good talent, and then it helps them to procure the material from those places. So, this is what international business is all about. So, today we discussed about international business scope, right. We have discussed its importance, its challenges, why international business is slowly becoming is growing up, right, with time, and it is, but it is very complex, as I said. It is not that easy because of reasons like cultural dimensions, political dimensions and all. But and then we discussed about the modes of entry. How do you enter into a new nation, a new country? It is not that simple. So, you may enter directly, you may enter indirectly, but then what precautions you have to take. So, there are so many things we have discussed, and in the future classes maybe we will take it one by one little more deeply, and we will study what parameters do impact international business and what factors do you should you keep in mind when you talk about international business, right. So, I wish you luck. Thank you so much. We will meet in the next session. Thank you so much.